The early morning mist still lingered over the pine-covered ridge when I stepped out with my usual thermos of coffee and a pocket knife clipped to my belt. My name's Walt, and I own a modest 5-acre plot tucked into the edge of a sleepy Oregon town, part wildland, part garden, and part mycology heaven. Life was simple, peaceful, and fragrant with the earthy scent of mushrooms growing in the shaded grove behind my cabin. I spent most of my days cultivating exotic fungi, the kind chefs in Portland would pay top dollar for, and the rest of my time sipping dark roast on the porch, listening to birds argue in the treetops. My mushroom grove wasn't just a hobby. It was my pride, my livelihood, and frankly, my spiritual retreat. Nestled among mossy stumps and thick beds of leaf litter, it was a delicate little microclimate I'd nurtured for over a decade. Shiitakes, lion's mane, morels in spring. It was a fungal paradise. That is, until the day a shrill voice cut through my sanctuary like a chainsaw through cedar. That was the first time I met Karen. She stood just outside the low wooden fence that marked the grove's boundary, hands on hips, sunglasses perched like daggers on her nose. Her platinum hair was shellacked into a helmet that wouldn't move in a hurricane, and her cardigan matched her purse in a way that screamed suburban HOA royalty. "Excuse me, sir," she barked. "Do you know that this part of the property is visible from the street and violates our community uniformity standards?" I blinked at her, trying to make sense of the nonsense. I hadn't signed up for any HOA. I lived outside the town limits precisely to avoid that kind of mess. But she was waving a clipboard and a smug grin, as if that alone gave her power. "That's not part of your concern," I replied calmly. "This land been mine for 15 years. There's no HOA jurisdiction here." Karen clicked her tongue and scribbled something on her clipboard, undeterred. "Well, it's unsightly, and mushrooms attract pests. If you won't clean it up voluntarily, we'll have to take further action." She turned on her heel and marched off, the sound of her sandals slapping the gravel like war drums. I stood there for a minute, more amused than worried. Surely she was just confused or bored. Either way, she'd get over it. Right. Except I hadn't realized then that Karen did get over things. She escalated them. And my mushroom grove, that was just the beginning. The following week, I noticed something odd on my morning walk to check the moisture levels in the grove. Orange plastic stakes, tall and aggressive, popped out of the ground like poisonous weeds. They ran along the eastern edge of my property line, right through the moss bed where my golden oysters grew best. I followed them like breadcrumbs until they ended at a stack of metal fencing panels leaning beside my old wheelbarrow. Karen had been here. I marched back up to the road, spotting her just as she was directing a couple of hired workers in neon vests. One of them had a post driver over his shoulder. Karen, meanwhile, stood with her arms crossed, surveying the landscape like a queen preparing to annex new territory. "Morning," I said sharply. "What the hell is this?" "Oh, I'm so glad you're here," she chirped, feigning innocence with the grace of a used car salesperson. "We're just putting up a small boundary fence for the HOA's new visual consistency project. We've had several complaints about the well. Organic clutter visible from the main road." I narrowed my eyes. "Karen, this isn't HOA land. You've got no business staking anything on my property." She waved a paper at me like it was a royal decree. "According to our revised community overlay map, your mushroom grove is in the shared visibility corridor. As such, it falls under neighborhood maintenance considerations." I took the paper from her and skimmed it. It was nonsense. Nothing legally binding, just some HOA document with a lot of words designed to look official to people who didn't know better. She was counting on intimidation and confusion, classic Karen tactics. "That's garbage," I said plainly. "You can't build anything here. Touch one mushroom and I'll see you in court." Karen scoffed. "I'd love to see you try. Fungi don't have property rights, sweetheart." She turned back to her workers. "Boys, keep going. That fence goes in today." I walked away before I did something unneighborly with that post driver. But inside, my stomach was doing somersaults of rage. She was really doing it, trying to fence off my grove, calling it unsightly, pretending her HOA held dominion over my land. For the first time since I moved here, I felt violated. Not by thieves or vandals, but by entitlement on legs, marching across my soil with fake authority and plastic stakes. The worst part, Karen wasn't just bluffing anymore. She was acting. She had plans, and if I didn't stop her soon, there might not be a grove left to save. Within days, the quiet sanctuary behind my cabin turned into a construction zone. The workers came back with drills, wire mesh, and even a signpost that read Visual Restoration Area HOA Project. I stood there dumbfounded, watching them stake it into my moss like it was a goddamn public park. Karen, of course, hovered nearby with a folding chair and a Starbucks iced something, micromanaging every move like a tyrant with a clipboard. "Don't scuff the birch roots," she snapped at a worker. "We're trying to improve the view, not destroy it." The irony would have been funny if I weren't so furious. My grove looked like a crime scene. Fence panels boxed in my mushrooms, casting shadows that threw off the humidity. Some of my prized shiitakes wilted in protest. She wasn't just ruining aesthetics, she was destroying years of cultivation. I approached the crew, trying once more to reason with them. "This is private property. She doesn't own this land. You're trespassing." One of the workers looked uncomfortable. "She said she had approval." "She doesn't," I cut in. "Not from me and not from anyone legal." Karen stood up with a dramatic huff, striding over like a reality TV villain. "You keep repeating that, but you don't seem to understand how HOAs work. We're not just enforcing lawn gnomes, you know. We have community oversight obligations. You'll thank us when your property value goes up." "My mushrooms are the value," I snapped. "You're choking them with this ridiculous fence." "Oh, please," she said, laughing like I'd told a knock-knock joke. "This isn't a farm, it's a messy hobby, and it's not zoned for agriculture anyway." That hit a nerve. I'd gone through all the paperwork when I bought the place. Zoned rural residential with allowances for agricultural microcultivation. She was bluffing again, but louder this time. I called the county office that afternoon, but they needed time to review the situation. Meanwhile, Karen kept building, emboldened by the silence. She even started organizing community cleanup volunteers to pick through the grove and remove waste vegetation. Translation: rip out anything she found ugly or unkempt. I started noticing broken mushroom stems, overturned logs, and even a pile of raked leaves someone had dumped on top of my delicate morel patch. It was sabotage disguised as beautification. That night, sitting by the grove with a flashlight and a bottle of cheap whiskey, I realized something. Karen wasn't going to stop. Not unless I gave her a reason to. And that's when it hit me. Something she hadn't counted on, something small, something slimy. And something very, very protected. The next morning, I skipped my usual coffee and went straight to the grove with a magnifying glass, a camera, and a gut full of grim determination. I knew what I'd seen before: tiny trails on damp wood, iridescent slime glistening in crescent patterns. I hadn't paid it much mind at the time, but now it could be my golden ticket. I crouched low, moving aside a log I'd left to rot naturally for the fungus. There it was, small, no bigger than my thumb, with a delicate whorled shell and a shimmering, translucent body. The Oregon forest snail, a rare species and one I remembered vaguely from a local conservation pamphlet I'd browsed years ago while renewing my fishing license. Back then I thought, huh, cool snail. Now I thought, sweet, sweet revenge. I took pictures from every angle, careful not to disturb them. I counted 5 snails in total, each nestled in their own corner of the grove. That was more than enough to start. With photos in hand, I sent an email to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, explaining the situation. I attached the photos, noted the location, and emphasized the potential habitat destruction due to unauthorized fencing and landscaping. Then I sat back and waited, knowing full well that bureaucracy moves slow, but conservation law moves with purpose. While I waited, I did my homework. Turns out, the Oregon forest snail is protected under state environmental law. It's considered a species of concern, especially because it relies on undisturbed, moist forest underbrush to survive, exactly the kind of environment my mushroom grove provided. Any action that could destroy or displace its habitat could result in hefty fines and legal action, especially if done without a proper environmental impact assessment. I couldn't wait to see Karen try to file that with her HOA. To make it even sweeter, I printed out a few educational pamphlets on the snail, complete with glossy photos and stern conservation warnings, and left them accidentally on the corner post of the fence where she liked to hover. She picked one up the next day and squinted at it like it was written in Klingon. "Endangered, please," she muttered aloud, but I saw the twitch, the uncertainty, the first crack in her concrete confidence. The next day, I received a reply from the Wildlife Department. They were interested. They wanted to send a field biologist to verify the presence of the snails. I gave them full access to my land and even flagged the spots where I'd seen them. Karen watched from her porch, arms crossed, expression sour as vinegar. This was it. The tide was turning. She had tried to smother my grove under a fence and a lie. Now I was going to smother her smugness under the weight of the law and a few well-placed snails. By the time the field biologist arrived, I turned my grove into a miniature wildlife preserve. Not only had I marked every snail sighting with biodegradable flags, but I'd also logged temperature and humidity readings, snapped time-stamped photos, and mapped out feeding trails like some backwoods David Attenborough. The biologist, Sarah, mid-30s, practical boots and sharp eyes, was impressed the second she stepped into the grove. "Wow," she said, crouching by a moss-covered stump. "You've created a perfect microhabitat. And these," she added, pointing to one of the snails, "are definitely Alagona townsondiana. That's textbook." Karen, of course, was lurking by her newly installed fence, trying to look innocent while eavesdropping from behind a pair of oversized sunglasses. "So," I asked Sarah, just loud enough for our unwelcome audience to hear, "what does this mean legally?" Sarah stood up, brushing off her pants. "It means any non-natural interference that could harm the snails or their habitat, especially fencing, landscaping, or pesticide use, is strictly prohibited, and it's enforceable under state environmental law. Whoever installed this fence could be liable for significant fines if they didn't conduct an impact assessment first." Karen twitched. I didn't look her way, but I could feel the shift, the first real moment of panic tightening her face like a rubber band about to snap. "Oh, and we'll be placing a temporary conservation notice here while the habitat review is completed," Sarah added casually. "In the meantime, any changes to this area would be considered a violation." Karen stormed off after that, stomping so hard I thought she might crack her wedge heels. That was satisfying, but I wasn't done yet. Later that afternoon, I printed up a few laminated signs that read, "Protected wildlife habitat, no entry without authorization. Violators subject to state and federal penalties." I zip-tied them right onto the HOA's metal fencing, turning their own improvement into a restricted area. To sweeten the irony, I sent a formal letter to the HOA board. Not that I was under them, but still, letting them know that any future interference with my land could result in legal action under the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife regulations. I even included Sarah's card for verification. Then, just for fun, I listed the grove on a local conservation walking tour map under the title Fungal Forest and Snail Sanctuary. Nothing like a bit of foot traffic to keep nosy Karens away. The trap was set, legally, beautifully, and most importantly, publicly. Now all I had to do was wait. And knowing Karen, she wasn't going to wait quietly. It didn't take long. The very next weekend, I was enjoying my morning stroll with a cup of coffee when I heard the unmistakable screech of someone in full meltdown mode. Karen had returned. Only this time, she wasn't just armed with a clipboard. She had reinforcements, 2 HOA board members, both looking equally confused and uncomfortable as she dragged them through my front gate like reluctant soldiers. "You see," she shrieked, jabbing a manicured finger toward the grove. "He's turning it into some kind of hippie tourist trap. Signs, flags, weird fungus. He's completely out of control." The 2 board members squinted at the signs posted on the fencing. One of them, a nervous-looking guy with a receding hairline, cleared his throat and said, Karen, that says protected habitat. Isn't this the place the state investigating?" Karen rolled her eyes. "Please, it's a mushroom patch with a few garden snails. He's playing you all." That was my cue. "Morning," I called cheerfully, emerging from behind a tree stump with a basket of fresh lion's mane. "Hope you're all here for the tour. First stop, the critically rare Oregon forest snail. They're small but legally mighty." One of the board members chuckled awkwardly, but Karen's face turned the shade of boiled lobster. "I'm calling the county," she barked. "This is environmental fraud. He's making this up to block our community improvements." Just then, right on cue, Sarah from Fish and Wildlife pulled up in her department SUV. She stepped out in her uniform, clipboard in hand, and waved at me. "Hi, Walt, just here to check on the snails. We're recommending permanent conservation status for the grove. Oh, and we'll need to document any damage from that fencing. Could result in fines." Karen's jaw actually dropped. She looked from Sarah to the board members, then back at me, as if trying to process that reality had officially betrayed her. You can't be serious," she stammered. "He's doing this on purpose." "Yes," I said, smiling. "I'm protecting endangered wildlife on my own land, legally. Imagine that." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, were you involved in placing any of this fencing?" Karen's mouth flapped like a trout on a dock. It was an HOA initiative." "Well, that initiative may have violated state conservation law," Sarah said coolly. "We'll need statements." The HOA board members stepped back like someone had thrown a lit firecracker. "Karen, we didn't authorize anything on private land," one of them muttered. Karen turned scarlet. I swear I could see the fury steaming out of her ears. She whirled around, flailing her clipboard, and stormed off in silence, her heels sinking into the damp moss with every furious step. I turned to Sarah, who was trying not to laugh. "Think she learned her lesson?" Sarah grinned. Oh, I think the snails just bought you a whole lot of peace. And maybe a few court documents for Karen. Karen didn't take defeat gracefully. The following week, her Facebook exploded with rants about fake farmers manipulating the system and how certain people were using government loopholes to ruin the aesthetic of the neighborhood. She even posted a blurry photo of me holding a mushroom, captioned, "Is this your wildlife?" Naturally, it backfired. Locals, many of whom had visited my grove during the conservation tour, flooded her comments with snail emojis and sarcastic messages like, "Snails have rights too, Karen, and don't fence what you don't understand." One guy even photoshopped her face onto a snail shell and titled it Karen the Slow Learner. It went mildly viral. Then came the real sting. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife issued a formal citation addressed directly to Karen and the HOA for unauthorized environmental disruption. The fine wasn't small. $5,000 plus a mandated community service requirement involving local conservation projects. That's right. Karen was ordered to spend her weekends helping restore wetlands and counting frogs. When the letter arrived, I happened to be out front trimming hedges. Karen stormed out of her house with the envelope, face betread, muttering every insult she could think of that didn't involve actual profanity. "You smug little mushroom man," she hissed. "You set me up." "Nope," I said, not even looking up. "You set yourself up. I just let the snails do the talking." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she had no comeback. But the final blow didn't come from me or the state. It came from her own HOA board. Turns out, the rest of the members weren't thrilled about being dragged into a legal mess over unauthorized fencing and made-up zoning rules. They held a meeting, public of course, and voted unanimously to remove Karen from her self-appointed beautification committee and suspend her voting rights until further notice. I wasn't there, but I heard the slow clap from 3 blocks away. And while Karen still walked the neighborhood, she did it with much less flair. No more clipboards, no more barking orders, just a brisk, silent power walk, sunglasses low, as if she could outrun her own reputation. The lady who tried to fence off my land now couldn't even legally organize a bake sale. Poetic justice, courtesy of a snail. Spring arrived like a fresh exhale, and with Karen effectively dethroned from her self-made HOA kingdom, life returned to its natural rhythm. The grove thrived under its new protected status. Mushrooms puffed up in fat clusters, the snails slid peacefully through the moss, and birds returned to perch on the old cedar posts where Karen's dreadful signs once hung. I even got a small grant from the state to help maintain the habitat, which I used to build a charming little wooden path through the grove for educational walks. Every Saturday, folks from town would come by for what they now affectionately called snail tailies and shiitakes. I'd lead them through the forest floor, telling the whole ridiculous saga of the HOA invasion, the conservation battle, and how a creature slower than Karen's bureaucratic nonsense brought her entire scheme to a halt. Laughter always followed the part about her being assigned to count frogs. That one never got old. One day, a little girl on the tour asked, "Do the snails know they're famous?" I chuckled. "I think they do. They've been real stars this year." Meanwhile, Karen had adopted a sort of forced invisibility. She started parking 2 blocks away from her own house to avoid questions, and neighbors whispered that she had tried to sell her home, but couldn't find a buyer who did Google her first. Apparently, that lady who tried to fence the snails had become her unofficial title in local real estate circles. She passed me once outside the community market. I gave her a polite nod, She pretended the cantaloupes were suddenly fascinating. The fencing was long gone, hauled away after the state's notice, and I'd turned one of the old metal posts into a bird feeder. The irony made the seeds taste better, I was sure of it. In the end, the grove was more than just saved. It was elevated. From humble mushroom patch to protected sanctuary, all because one stubborn woman poked the wrong corner of the woods. She came in swinging with rules, fences, and fake authority, and left with a citation, a demotion, and a new understanding of the phrase, "Don't mess with Mother Nature." Now every time I sip coffee on my porch and hear the soft rustle of snails sliding beneath the leaves, I smile. Because peace isn't just the absence of Karen, it's the quiet revenge that echoes through the moss, carried slowly but surely on a snail back.